Hello there, welcome to Bruxelles Je t'aime, Euronews' talk show all about the European capital of Brussels. On Brussels, my love, we take a look at some stories making news across Europe this week and find out what's at stake for you and for Europe. My name is Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, a joint trip, but a disjointed outcome. The EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and French President Emmanuel Macron are back from Beijing. But their lack of a unified position has created a bit of an outcry. We take a closer look at how divided the European Union is when it comes to China and ask who really holds the reins on the world stage. And red cheeks in the Pentagon. The US is in panic mode after top secret intelligence about the war in Ukraine was leaked. It exposes sensitive information about a number of European countries and their strategies vis-à-vis the war in Ukraine. The big question in Brussels: how did this information get online and how will it impact efforts to stop the war? To talk about these stories and much, much more, I'm joined here in our studio by the German MEP Reinhard Bütikofer from the Greens. Welcome. Bulgarian MEP Eva Majdal from the European People's Party. And also Marie-Anne Prion from the think tank GlobeSec Brussels. So thank you so much for being with us here on Euronews. And let's start with that trip to China, because I understood it was meant to showcase EU unity regarding China policy, but actually it seemed to have done the opposite. We start with yourself, Mr. Bütikofer, because you're also on the China EU delegation in the Parliament.
Thanks for having me on your show. I'm not sure that the intention was to show unity. I think President Macron invited Ursula von der Leyen to join him on his trip because he wanted to elevate his own position. Everybody is traveling to China. He wanted to stand out by being the one national leader that brings along the European Commission President. She was meant to be an accessoire for him, but she turned that around successfully, gave a very nice speech, a very sober speech, that I think a lot of European leaders also can support. And then in Beijing, she firmly stood her ground. So if I'm taking a step back and ignore the very, let's say, animated discussions that we're having at the moment about the ill-considered remarks from President Macron, I would say Europe is gaining additional self-confidence in our dealing with China.
Okay, so pat on the back there perhaps from you for Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, for standing out and not just being in the shadows of the French President Emmanuel Macron. Eva Majdal, what's your take?
I think it was very interesting to see that the trip of President von der Leyen came only after she made a speech to the European Parliament that was on China. And I think the timing was not because of her trip to China with President Macron, but I think the president has realized that Europe is in need of a renewed China strategy. And I'm grateful that she has taken that lead to put the topic on the agenda. It has been on the agenda of people like Reinhard or myself, because I'm very much involved on transatlantic relationship. And you cannot avoid the panda in the room when you speak transatlantic relationship, but when you speak global relationship as well, or when you speak technological advancement. So I think it was the president's attempt to say, look, EU leaders, it's time for us to craft our China strategy. It has been way too long that Brussels never talked China.
Okay, and from GlobeSec think tank, what was your perspective?
I believe von der Leyen definitely showed a lot of leadership throughout the past years, but especially also on China. I think though this reflects the dissensions that exist amongst Europeans, especially the lack of leadership of France and Germany at the moment, dissensions also in terms of points of view from Central Europe and Western Europe. But there is also for me an element of China's playing those dissensions. They definitely want to deny support to the US. And for this, they have been targeting specific countries. When Xi Jinping came to Europe, he visited Berlin, he visited Paris, Rome, Budapest, but he didn't come to Brussels.
He snubbed Brussels.
Absolutely. So I think China played it very well this time.
Okay, well, we know what EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said and what line she's been taking, which is to de-risk from China and to tread a little bit with caution. She was very critical as well about the relationship, because in case our viewers, in case you haven't had a look, take a listen now to Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President.
As you know, the European Union is growing more vigilant about dependencies. Some of these dependencies raise significant risks for us, as does the export of sensitive emerging technologies. Within this context, we all know that this leads to calls by some to decouple from China. I doubt that this is a viable or desirable strategy. I believe that we have to engage in de-risking.
EU Commission President there, Ursula von der Leyen. Eva Meidel, this de-risking, would you agree with the Commission President there?
You probably know that one of my main areas of work is technology. And what I have said is that, at least urgently in that field, Europe has to craft its China strategy. We have to very quickly understand who are our strategic alliances, what are the partnerships and collaborations we want to have, and how China fits or actually doesn't fit into that picture. So for me, it is on certain things about de-risking, and maybe on certain areas, especially in the technology area, about decoupling. So it's a very nuanced picture. It cannot be black and white, unfortunately, because it would have been easier in a way. But we are in a situation where we have our dependencies, but in the same time we have our strategic technologies that we would not want them to be in the hands of certain autocratic regimes. So at least in the area of technology, because this is going to be, it is already the main arena where the biggest battles are fought, will be fought in the years to come. At least there we need to be very fast, strategic, and understand what is Europe's interest and how to best protect it, while in the same time working together with our strategic allies.
And the German Foreign Minister, Mr. Bütikofer, is in China. She was off to China as well this week to set the record straight on what the Germans' interests are regarding China. And I saw a senior German MP said that Emmanuel Macron managed to turn the China trip into a PRQ for Z and a foreign policy disaster for Europe.
Well, I think our foreign minister will very clearly send a couple of messages that the Chinese need to hear. I know that she's firmly in the de-risking camp, and that she will tell the Chinese that we will stridently follow that course that has been set by the president. And de-risking means reducing over-dependencies where they would limit our decision-making options. That could imply saying no, for instance, and should imply, I would say, saying no to some Chinese actors like Huawei. It could include, as President von der Leyen said, having outbound FDI screening also. I think we should have that. But the overall approach says we're not severing the relationship. We just want to make sure that we will never again develop the kind of dependency on an authoritarian regime that we allowed to develop vis-a-vis Russia. And we're now paying a bitter price for that.
And what we saw from Emmanuel Macron after his China-friendly visit, if you like, was an interview he gave to a couple of different medias like Les Echos and Politico, saying that the European Union, in fact, needed to reduce its dependency on the US and become a third pole in world affairs. He said the paradox would be that, overcome with panic, we believe that we are just America's followers. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say BS.
Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily very realistic. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of dependencies on China. To change, I don't believe at this point Europe has the capacities, not necessarily the willingness to produce everything that we want to produce on our soil. I'm thinking, for example, of pharmaceuticals components that our regulation forbids. So it's not necessarily related to the US, but I believe decoupling actually would be with China is essential. With the US, that could be an alternative from China.
On the comment you just showed us from President Macron, I mean, it might play well on his home turf, even though I think right now no one in France is actually so much, interested in what the president is saying on this global and international issues. But I think it doesn't sound at all realistic. It is not realistic. It is not what is happening right now with our industries and with the strategic areas we would like to further develop and advance, especially in the technological arena.
Would you agree with
so
that,
I think he
Mr.
was quite badly advised to
He was
come
badly
up with
advised?
such a quote.
I was really angered by his approach, lambasting the US without saying one single critical word about his gracious host, Xi Jinping, the dictator. I think that was very ill-conceived. On the other hand, I would warn against the language of decoupling, because that plays into the hands of those around Europe that believe that Americans are imposing their agenda on Europeans. I think that is not the case, and I think we have very good reasons of our own to get engaged in the Indo-Pacific, to take on China. We have identified China as a systemic rival. That's not what the Americans told us. That's the conclusion we came to on our own analysis. But the language of decoupling is just not in sync with European realities, and the de-risking, that's a language you can assemble people around.
Okay. Very briefly, Eva, madam?
Well, I think I think very often we speak that Europe is a follower to someone. I think we are partners with the US. I think we are working towards certain strategic partnerships also in the Indo-Pacific. I think we do have our agenda, but we need a renewed agenda on some of those topics and some of those areas to craft it and to be able to speak with one voice. We cannot go on such a trip and sign different, hymn sheets.
Well, that's what's quite funny this week, because we saw everyone speaking with a different voice, and we saw as well the Polish Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki. He was furious with Emmanuel Macron in China, and he was actually in the United States, in DC this week, and he spoke to the press before he went on that trip. Take a listen.
This alliance with the United States is the absolute foundation of our security. It is based on two pillars: economic and defense cooperation. I am going to the United States to strengthen both these pillars, to strengthen their foundations, and to build them in cooperation with our allies.
That was Mateusz Morawiecki there, trying to mop up the mess perhaps created by Emmanuel Macron. Marianne?
Yes, I think this boils down to the different vision and how much more pro-US Central Europe is compared to Western Europe.
And even more so with the war in Ukraine.
Even more so with the war in Ukraine. There has been a really blown to the leadership of France and Germany because of this issue, that's for sure.
Eva Majdal?
This just basically shows that we do need this renewed China strategy. We see the differences and divergences we have across member states and regions in Europe, and I think we need to have a more holistic approach. And probably we won't agree in all areas, but I think we need to agree in some areas related to our security, defense, to technological advancement first, before tackling others.
Sorry, I disagree there. I don't think we need a new China strategy. We have identified that the reality of our EU-China relations is complex. We are systemic rivals. We do compete. On some issues, we try to cooperate if they play ball. And I would insist on continuing the efforts to try to cooperate wherever that is possible. We should not fool ourselves just hoping for cooperation, but we should be realistic where it's possible. But the president of the Commission, von der Leyen, with her speech, she has given a good outline of where Europe should be going. I'm against having a broad-ranging discussion about strategy. I would say let's sit down together and let's implement what she has put on the table.
Very briefly, Eva Meidel, and then I'd like to bring in the perspective of the business.
Maybe just to clarify, it's about speaking with one voice, and I agree that the president of the Commission has shown where the direction should be. But we are currently seeing leaders speaking in a very different manner on the topic. So if we don't necessarily, I would agree, it's not about a renewed strategy, it's about the strategy that keeps everybody behind and united. Because I feel on these global issues and extremely complex topics, I mean, only united we can stand, and divided we will fall, and it would be way more difficult for us to be successful.
Europe will never, ever speak with just one voice. We are strong in our diversity, but the action has to be united. And if you look there, we have a good track record. Trade defense instruments that we have developed over the years between 2016 and now, quite a success story.
Marianne, will Europe never speak with one voice?
Probably not, that's true. But I think, and I would agree with Mr. Bütikofer, Europe has the opportunity to have a leader right now, and in the person of von der Leyen, and we would be, I think it would be a good idea to follow her leadership.
So is Ursula von der Leyen the lady you should call if you want to speak to Europe?
Yes, yeah. I would say so.
Okay. We're running out of time, but I would just like to bring in the perspective from the business community, because they were very much in favour of Emmanuel Macron's trip to China and what he said, because he, of course, took a number of CEOs along with him. Paddy Cosgrave, that's the CEO of the famous Web Summit, he said, "In my humble opinion, Macron is correct. It is the path towards a more balanced, prosperous and peaceful future for Europe. Macron's position on China is that of the vast majority of serious business and political leaders in Europe."
That is not true.
Invest in China. You disagree with Paddy Cosgrave?
Yeah. And the vast majority of German business disagrees with him. There has been a press release done by the German Federation of Industry, the BDI, that was following very strictly on the lines of von der Leyen. They, for instance, argued that there is no point in now trying to pursue a revitalization effort with CAI, because it would have to be reconsidered very fundamentally. So he may speak for a number of multinationals, but he's not speaking for the business community.
He's not speaking for BDI.
I have not talked to a single person over the past couple of days that would agree with the third pole expression said by Macron and the strategy he's outlined.
Yourself?
Yeah, I believe a large part of the economic actors, companies have experienced being in China. There's issues for intellectual property. There has been issues of market access, and this has not been resolved. So I'm not sure how much profitable it is really for European companies compared to Chinese companies and what they gain access from with us being there. So I think I would be a bit more careful if I was a European company with engaging too much with China.
Okay, and I saw the European People's Party, Eva Meidel, with the party that you belong to, they've called for a debate on EU-China relations next week in Strasbourg. Very quick reaction. Is that a good idea? We'll have more voices on China?
Yeah, I believe the debate will probably happen. We'll know, I believe, later on today. And it's, again, part of this discussion that I would like to trigger. I think we need to talk China. I think it's necessary that we are more vocal on our approach. We are more critical where it's necessary. How can a leader of a big European country go and not, speak about the values, about freedom and democracy on which we base the way we do things here?
Okay. Eva Meidel, we're going to have to leave it there, but we will tune in next week if that debate on EU-China takes place in the Parliament. But stay with us, because after the break, we will be zooming in on the recent US intelligence leaks that expose various activities of European countries in stopping the war in Ukraine. We'll see you soon here on Euronews.
t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Welcome back to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekly talk show that picks apart some of the stories that impact Europe. Well, one headline that caught our eye this week was about the leaked US documents that gave a rare peek into the Pentagon's intelligence on Russia's offensive on Ukraine, for example. Over 100 documents still being verified were released about the Russian military, about European countries' movements in Ukraine, and there was also some US intel there on the Middle East. So I'd like to ask the panel, have you seen the leaks and do you think it's a big deal?
I haven't seen the leaks, and I'm not interested in digging deeper there. I figure, according to what the media have been reporting, that there is information mixed with disinformation. But the one thing that stands out, and that is the important part, and that's not about who leaked it and why. The one thing that stands out is that clearly the information that is being put on the table here corroborates the assessment that we're not supplying enough support to Ukraine.
I mean, Ukraine, for its part, has said that the leaks are based on, quote, a large amount of fictitious information and say they won't impact the direction they will take regarding their spring offensive. What's your take?
Of course, we have to be careful about the information contained in those documents. It can have been altered, but I must say I was pretty worried looking at the content of the document. There is a lot of information about Ukraine's capabilities, positions, and this at the time when they want to launch a counteroffensive could give Russia keys to at least stop, if not worse, this offensive. It's also detrimental, I think. It reinforces Russia's propaganda that this is a proxy war against NATO, because it is shown that we have special forces on the ground. And third, I think it undermines trust amongst allies, and that is definitely detrimental for our defense.
And Eva Maidel, did you look at these leaks and discuss them this week in Brussels?
No, I haven't looked at them. I think leaks are always a very regrettable moment in any situation, but even now more so. But in the same time, we need to be clear where we are. We are currently finding ourselves in the middle of the war. I think we sometimes tend to forget that because rockets are not flying around Brussels or Strasbourg. Thankfully so. But I think, with every war, there's an information warfare going on. And this is what we're witnessing right now. But this should not distract us from the bigger picture and the bigger purpose that we stand behind to protect the sovereignty and safety of Ukrainian people. In the same time, we know that no system is infallible. So we have had cyber attacks. We have had infrastructure attacks. We will probably witness more leaks. So I think this definitely does not help our efforts.
And what about that point that Marianne made on trust, Mr. Bütikofer?
I trust that the Biden administration and the majority, the bipartisan majority in the Congress, have taken a firm stance in support of Ukraine. And I hope that they will continue to follow that course. There are some warring voices from the extreme right and the extreme left there, but I hope the mainstream will continue understanding that this is not in America's interest and it's not in Europe's interest if they would relent on their support.
Eva Maidel?
Again, I think it's regrettable, but it's not the whole ball game. I mean, when it comes to our partnership with the US, with the UK, EU as a whole, and in Ukraine, we have a very sophisticated relationship. It's multifaceted. It's not simplistic. It's considerable. And I think we, have so many different and various strategies that it's not good what happened, but I think focusing on it right now too much it wouldn't help us to continue with the strategies we have. And I think we need to build on those strengths that we have among this relationship.
And Eva Maidel, earlier you mentioned the fact that the bombs are not being thrown over Brussels or Strasbourg, but what we have seen this week was Ukrainians outside the European Parliament. They held an exhibition reminding the world that they will never agree with the Russian occupation, and among them was the Lithuanian MEP Petras Auštrevičius, and he told Euronews' Shandor Ziros that these leaks would not be stopping Ukraine from achieving their military objectives. Take a listen.
I see the Ukrainian military forces well structured, ready and under good command. I don't think at any leakage or any propaganda-like action might put away or constrain Ukraine's readiness, to fight for its freedom again, for getting back territories. I think it's a matter of time for Ukraine's victory.
Is it a matter of time before Ukraine's victory can be witnessed?
Well, that depends. If there is enough support, if there's consistent support, if there is more support than we have seen, it will be a matter of time. If we drop the ball, if France, for instance, doesn't step up its support, well, I don't know what happens.
What's your take at Globsec?
I absolutely agree. We need to at least maintain the same level of support, but it would be really beneficial to even increase it as much as we can. Of course, we're running low on stocks, but we should have already started production a long time ago. We are starting now to really try to produce as much as is needed. I'm afraid of timing. Is it going to come early enough for Ukraine? Because again, coming back to those documents, they don't seem to have a lot of ammunition left. So there is a sense of urgency, I would say.
We have to absolutely continue the work with our international partners, and we ideally have to step up our game. I agree that production has slowed down, and this was something that European leaders were warned. And if there would be a gap of a couple of weeks or a couple of months where deliveries of ammunition and military capabilities will be less than before, that definitely does not play well into Ukraine's possibility for advancement. But I'm confident that there will be no war fatigue,
okay.
And that our efforts, just like the European Parliament has called numerous times, will continue to be strong.
Okay, Eva Maidel, Reinhard Bütikofer and Marianne Prion, thank you so much for your insights and thank you for watching. We'll see you soon here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekly talk show that takes a look back at some of the stories hitting the headlines this week. I'm Maeve McMahon. Well, this week our screens were flooded with images of the US President Joe Biden in Northern Ireland commemorating 25 years of the Good Friday peace process. But what we'd like to talk about instead is the lack of peace perhaps in another country, in Israel. In the last few weeks, tensions have flared and numerous attacks have taken place. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis have been taking to the streets to protest against the plans of Benjamin Netanyahu's government to tighten control on the Supreme Court. So I'd like to start just by asking our panel, are you following the situation in Israel, or is your mind too focused perhaps on the war in Ukraine? Eva Maidel?
When we witness protests, when we have elections, of course that's part of our democratic process. But in the same time, when things get violent, when there's casualties, things get extremely concerning. For me, it is very concerning that a state like Israel is in continuous instability. This is not good, of course, politically, but it is of key importance, this country, for the whole region. So in my opinion, a weak Israeli state is a problem for the whole Middle East and the whole Middle East peace process, and especially for the situation in Gaza. So this is why we have to be paying attention, and I think colleagues in the Foreign Affairs Committee are acting on that.
Are you acting on that, or do you feel that this issue has been neglected?
I'm worried about the developments, and the most worrying developments are those inside Israel. The efforts by the Netanyahu-led present government to undo judicial independence, to do away with some of the checks and balances that characterize a Republican democracy, that's something that must be worrying, because it undercuts the strength of Israel as a democracy.
And Israel, of course, claims to be the only democracy in the Middle East.
Well, whatever they claim, I think the citizens of Israel have proven that they are willing to stand up for their democracy. That has been remarkable. I have never seen such a widespread mobilization in defense of the democracy, maybe with the exception of Hong Kong in 2019.
Let's bring in the perspective from Marie and from Globsec.
Yeah, I think this is quite worrying, because it's a perfect combination of a political and security crisis at the same time. And Israel has warned that this could lead to security challenges for them. Of course, actors that are attacking Israel can seize this opportunity to do so. And I would also, we have seen that illiberal movement leaders, populists, have taken example onto each other. And I would worry for this attack on liberal democracy to be
So everyone's worried. So what should be done? What can Brussels do?
Brussels can take a clear stance, as all of our governments have, as the European Parliament has. We continue upholding the position that the occupation and the settlement policy is illegal according to international law, that this government should not pursue more settlement establishments, that they should not legalize illegal outposts that have been illegal even under Israeli law. I think we have to make sure that Israel understands we are always willing to defend their right to self-determination. We want Israel to be able to live in peace with their neighbors, but we also have to insist that Israel contributes.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that story, but I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Thank you so much to our guests, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon right here on Euronews, and of course, Euronews.com.